It's 5:30, so we're kicking off. Welcome to another webinar by Technion Australia, this time in partnership with UTS and the Embassy of Israel, where we give you the opportunity to tap into the world of our scientists, our researchers, and like today, to our graduates of the university, who have for over 100 years continued to shape the world we live in by developing cutting-edge research, applications, and innovation. My name is Ori Danieli. I'm the CEO of Technion Australia, the representative arm of Technion, Israel's Institute of Technology. And for those who are less familiar, Technion is one of the world's leading universities dedicated to science, technology, and engineering. And with many of Israel's greatest inventions and discoveries credited to the Technion, it is often regarded as the backbone of Israel's claim to fame as the startup nation. In Australia specifically, we're part of a global network with the mission to support the university scientists by encouraging philanthropic support and promoting research collaboration with Australia. I want to start by acknowledging our event partners today. As I mentioned, the University of Technology in Sydney, which is ranked the #1 young university in Australia and has a total of about 44,000 students, making it one of Australia's largest universities. So it's a privilege to be associated with UTS. And our second partner today is the Israeli Embassy in Canberra, and we will hear from the Deputy Ambassador shortly. Most importantly, I wanted to acknowledge our speakers today, Jasmine Azito, who is a cybersecurity engineer at Canva, which is one of Australia's most exciting companies to follow today. And she's, of course, a UTS graduate. And Avi Kastan, who is the founder, I hope I pronounced it correctly, is the founder of SixSkill, which is a really exciting cyber technology company from Israel, which he'll tell you more about shortly, as well as Professor Michael Blumenthal, who from UTS, who will be moderating the conversation. So thank you, three of you. So today we will talk about the dark web and everything that goes along with it, such as cybercrime, cyber threats, cyber attacks, and so on. Clearly a very topical matter, as this webinar specifically has smashed its record number of registrations with over 1,200 already registered. So as with all our webinars, we encourage your participation. So please feel free to ask questions by clicking on the Q&A tab below, and our speakers will do their best to answer. And just for the record, so you know, this event is recorded and we will post it later on our social platforms. But just before we dive in, it's my great pleasure to welcome Ron Gerstenfeld, Ron, who is Israel's Deputy Ambassador to Australia, to formally welcome our guests and our speakers. Ron, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Ori, and don't feel bad with mispronouncing my surname. It's happened to my wife as well, and we are married over 20 years now, so just understand. Well, it's a great pleasure to be able to collaborate again with you, Ori, and Technion, and with Michael, Angela, and the University of Technology of Sydney, two remarkable institutions who are actually changing the world and improving the life by developing very interesting research and technologies for all of us. I just wanted to mention that 2020 was not a good year for the world and was not a good year for the economy and the industry because of the terrible pandemic that we all hope that will be over with very soon. I can say that it was a very good year for Israel's cybersecurity industry in a whole. Most, I guess, in the entire world, because many of the activity that we used to do face-to-face or in person, we transferred it to the cyberspace and more demand from industry and technologies. Just a few examples. Israeli company recruited in the year 2020 about $3 billion from investors all over the world. There was 20 purchase and acquired or mergers and acquisition deals in the world for $4.7 billion and export of almost $7 billion. Israeli investment in cybersecurity company is about 31% of the entire world market these days. And a very nice figure as well, there's been 5 new Israeli companies joined this year, 2020, last year actually, to the family of unicorn company, which is private company or shared the market value is considered to be one that more than $1 billion, which presume 33% of the entire unicorn company in the world. So there's a lot to hope for and a lot to do and a lot to develop. And Israel and Australia are both leading in the domain of cybersecurity. We are very glad about it, and a lot of scope for collaboration, both in research, industry, and science. So please take it from there, Ori. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. I think it's time to get the show on the road now, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce Professor Michael Blumenstein, who is the Associate Dean, Research Strategy and Management at the University of Technology in Sydney, for the second time moderating our webinar. So thank you, Michael, for sharing your time and insight. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Ori, and I'd like to also thank Ron for his introduction, and I'd like to acknowledge, the partnership on this webinar with Technion Australia and Technion and UTS, and particularly the Faculty of Engineering and IT, which I represent. We're really excited, and of course, I'd like to also thank our international alumni, leadership in the university for supporting the active promotion of this event. Thanks to Angela and Leonie and team. But I just like to just say it's a real pleasure again to be moderating this panel session, this time around cybersecurity. And I'm just so excited. It's an amazing topic, and we'll soon see as I give a brief introduction to our speakers that we've got two formidable speakers who are excellent and top in their fields, both in Australia and in Israel, talking about some very important topics, which I'll start off with some questions that I'll announce. I just want to make a comment. UTS is a technology-based university. It's extremely geared towards solving the world's challenges around cyber and other areas, and it's an amazing pleasure because, apart from being ranked #1 young university, I was just informed yesterday that the rankings for the academic world universities ranking came out for 2021, and we've now retained our #1 spot in Australia as a computer science and engineering leader in the country by those rankings. And also we've come up a second year in a row as #1 in telecommunications engineering. And by those rankings, we're also number 11th in the world now, up from 13 in computer science engineering, and now number 16 in the world in telecommunication engineering. It's an amazing outcome for us, and we're very excited. But it's one of the reasons for this success is our alumni and the amazing careers and achievements they've had. So I'd like to, without further ado, introduce our panelists, distinguished alumni from both UTS and Technion respectively. So I'd like to introduce, and I know Ori's already mentioned, Jasmina, who is a security engineer and specializes in cyber threat intelligence, but as well is a freelance illustration artist. She started her career in video game development and Japanese fashion before shifting to cybersecurity. And as Ori has mentioned, she now works at Canva in the detection and response team, keeping Canvanauts and Canva users safe from cyber baddies. But very importantly, she's one of our distinguished alumni from the University of Technology, Sydney, and she holds a bachelor's degree in science in games development, networks and network security from UTS. And it's a real pleasure to have you on the panel. So welcome, Jasmina. And our second panelist, Avi Kastan, who brings more than 20 years of entrepreneurial and leadership experience in the technology and network security industry. As Ori has already mentioned, he's the founder of SixSkill, a company which is a leading cybersecurity entity in the dark web arena. So very related to the topic we're discussing today. But he's served in a number of roles prior to SixSkill, including legendary disruptive companies, some of which you probably have heard of previously: Checkpoint, Vocal Tech. Avi holds a Bachelor of Science in Computer Engineering and MBA in Management of high-tech firms, both from degrees from Technion, the Israeli Institute of Technology. So I welcome you both, Jasmina and Avi. This is going to be a really interesting conversation. And I'd really love to kick off with the first question, which I'm going to open up to both of you, so please jump in. Look, the digital age has brought significant advances to society, but it's been through the advent of groundbreaking technologies. However, with the proliferation of this computing technology, mobile devices, the internet, there has been a bit of a dark side that's emerged. So much so that, we've heard reports from the Australian, police that, regular crime rates have actually dropped and appear to be decreasing, whilst cyber-related crimes appear to be on the rise. So just an open question to you both, in your experience, what are the major cyber-related threats that are facing companies and individuals today? Who'd like to start off?
I can go first, if you like.
Sounds good.
Cool.
Let's go.
So yeah, it's an interesting question, right? Because when we think about crime, a lot of crime is kind of with the intent to do something really simple like make money. So the biggest threat that I've seen and a lot of the cyber community has seen recently is the advent of things like ransomware. Malware can be used to just cause havoc and to just annoy people. It can also be used by nation states for espionage and things like that. But in terms of what, your petty crime, I think ransomware has really kind of gained popularity because it's been a very lucrative business. And if you look at some of the ransomware operators, they have great customer support. They're very advanced, and there's even an ecosystem in and amongst cyber criminals where, they'll white label their ransomware variants and sell it to each other who can then use it. So I'm going to go with ransomware on the major cyber related threats facing both companies and individuals. There are different variants that, target people and businesses, but that's going to be my answer on that.
Avi, do you have anything to add?
Yes. I would like that besides the ransomware, we see a lot of spear phishing attacks. And an interesting point about that is we are seeing an increase in the level of sophistication of the wall attacks as a wall, okay? And sometimes you may ask, or we ask ourselves, why this is happening. And I think personally that the dark web has created like a infrastructure for people to do like collective intelligence in place where it has been historically much. People didn't speak about certain topics in the clear web on the public as well, but they do in the dark web. And when you go deeper, you see that humans develop more creativity there. So collective intelligence is always more clever than anyone separately. So this may explain in certain way, but spear phishing we see together with the ransomware, we see on the main trends.
This next question, and I really appreciate your answers to that because it's important even for our our guests or viewers of this webinar to actually understand sort of the threats that have faced them individually. But I'm just going to change the tone a little bit because you're both cyber experts in your respective companies, and I'd like to hear from both of you. Here you are saving your company's assets and brands as leaders in cybersecurity. But can you tell us a little bit about how your journey, where your journey took you in terms of your trajectory from graduating from both UTS and Technion respectively, and what inspired you to pursue your passion in such an area, which is now one of the hottest topics in technology? Who'd like to kick off?
I can go again. We can do like a ping pong.
Sounds good.
Yeah, so as you kind of mentioned in my intro, my journey is a bit all over the place. So traditionally started out in the art space, but I've always really loved technology. And unlike some of my peers in the industry, I didn't have the opportunity with, most people goes, oh, my dad's a programmer and he's worked at IBM and that's how I got into computers. I didn't really have that experience. So I've always kind of been tinkering with what I had in front of me. So I guess the reason I went into games development is because I loved video games, pretty much, play them every single day. Loved art, so I wanted to really combine the two. But I also have this side of me that's like a problem solving, critical thinking side. And so I studied games development at UTS and did network security on the side, partially because I was interested in both, but also partially because I did realize that creative careers are a little bit more difficult in terms of like job security. And as I found out through numerous failed startups, the gaming industry in Australia is a bit rocky. So I kind of fell into it by accident, to be honest with you. I was always really interested, but I didn't think I had the skills or the knowledge to be able to make a career out of it. But I think when I started, you know, my journey in cyber, I realized just how little everybody knew about it, even the people that were the professionals. Like we're all kind of just blind stabbing around in the dark and learning. So that made me feel a little bit better. And then kind of starting out in consulting with some, you know, major companies in Australia and realizing, hold on a minute, I am actually the person that's giving you advice on what to do. So maybe I do know something about this topic. And yeah, that kind of led me down that rabbit hole. So it was a bit of an interesting kind of journey, but yeah, started in consulting, then moved on to Canva, which by the way, is kind of the best of both worlds for me because it's design, it's a design company, but I also get to do cyber. So it's great.
Thanks, Jasmina. That's an awesome story. And Avi, how about yourself?
Yeah, well, my journey started, I remember when I was a little kid, not a long time ago. And we still have these computers, and the whole gaming industry was fascinating, and the kinds of hacking, stuff like that. It was very attracted to that, and the challenge, how you manage to hack these games so you can win. For a teenager boy, it was great. And then you start selling stuff so you can make money out of that. And then when I was 18, I came to Israel and I started, and everything stopped, and I started studying, as you mentioned, in the Technion. I think I had a lot of luck in my professional career. When I finished the Technion, the first project started to work was for the IDF here, for the Army. So basically was in charge of managing a communication controller between several forces between the Army. So the idea was it falls in hands of the enemy, they cannot understand. Everything is public today, so nothing about that. And then, as you mentioned, I think I had the luck to be very close to very smart people along the way. So I was kind of close to all the stuff along all these years. And then I remember that when we started thinking about all these cybersecurity issues, it really fascinated me because you were seeing, I mean, the potential there was huge. And the interesting is, I mean, the field, as we all know, was growing and there was more information and more data. However, the intelligence people or companies were able to issue about that, the conclusions about that and what you do, it was decreasing. So it was kind of paradox. And then we start thinking of why this paradox was happening. And then we start realizing about the whole thing of the dark web and what's going on there. And yeah, and well, basically it attracted me, and we find, when we created Six Seal out of that.
Amazing to see the different journeys, but I think the attraction of the importance of the area and the realization of the significant part that cyber plays across things, not just technology, which is a great segue into my next question. Actually, when people do think about cybersecurity and cybercrime, they think of technology as the main driver. Okay, because we always talk about protecting things and cyber attacks, coming through some back channels of technology that aren't protected, etc. But when looking at solving issues relating to cybersecurity and cybercrime, both of you probably can comment on what other considerations need to be factored in, on top of the technological challenges. So, would you have some views on that, Jasmina?
Yeah, look, honestly, if we think about cybercrime and we strip the cyber from it and we just think about crime, we have to think about why people do crime. So if we use the whole ransomware example, it's with that intention is to make money, just for that scenario. So throughout the ages, people have always been finding ways to make money. You've got your, you know, your snake oil salesmen scamming people, but now you've got your, you know, people sending phishing emails trying to trick you into giving them money in a different way. So really the problem is not the technology is just the tool. It's just allowing people a different avenue or a different method of doing the same thing that they've always done. So I think some of the challenges there are more psychological and societal. Really, when you think about it, there could be socioeconomic factors that come into play there as well that drive people to do things that they do, and as well as a whole bunch of other factors. So yeah, I definitely think that focusing on the technology is definitely a slippery slope because you're not addressing the root cause of the issue, and sometimes you can do more harm than good, as we're seeing, you know, with different ways that law enforcement is trying to deal with the problem, and how that impacts our privacy and our rights and things like that. So it's definitely a tricky one.
Yeah, I would totally.
Jasmina.
Yeah, I totally agree with Jamina. The problem is not technological in nature, but I think it's psychologically in nature. And the question that we need to understand is how we as human beings who make decisions, what motivates us, why we do what we do. And yes, you can argue, okay, people want to earn money, so why not do that? But this is only one. But this is only part, and maybe a small part of the story. There are much more about that. I will give you an example. When we started Six Seal, what we noticed, as I started saying before, that the amount of data and information was growing. However, the conclusions were decreasing. And then we come to realize what will happen if you analyze all this information, not just as data as information, because we are not machines after all, but as a human beings. And then we started analyzing that as a social network. So we start to call that the dark web social network. And the interesting thing is that when you realize and you visualize this dark web social network, there are many things that come to your attention. For example, we started putting some rating, like in every organization, you have number 1, 2, 3, etc. And the same sentence that is said by different people, it has totally different meaning. So you need to have this into account. And then you can see, for example, that people sometimes do things in order to feel important, or they gain something that in their real life they don't have. So you need to have all this into account, and then you can reach very interesting conclusions.
Yeah, just to build onto that, I think you touched on a really good point actually around kind of the social network and the social aspects of it. Because when I think about, you know, you hacking games, you know, as a teenager, why would you do that? You would do it to feel important, to feel good, right? Because you want to win. So sometimes, you know, the motivation might not be money. It might be to feel powerful in that social situation. And even I've seen in some of these cybercrime forums, there's a very defined pecking order. And some of these people may not have that feeling of social power in their other networks, but in that network, you know, they're the boss, they're the king. So there's other motivations, there's power as well as money, and a sense of community as well.
Yeah, exactly. And to manage to know, we apply a lot of artificial intelligence is trying to understand that what motivates us, what make us act, and how we make decisions. After all, by the way, nothing to do with the rational side. Okay, we are not rational people. So, but if not, then what? Yes, and this is fascinating in my point of view. And one more point I will say, that the whole point I think of technology, of intelligence, is to try to, for example, one of the things we do as a cyber intelligence company, we try to analyze our opponent, our enemy, okay, as much as you can. So I always say that if something surprises you, you get surprised, even in life sometime. Apparently you did not do a nice intelligence job, okay? Because if you had the right intelligence, then you wouldn't be surprised. So you need to understand and know everything before they happen, and then you're able to see many of the things before they happen, naturally.
It's great, really, really good conversation. It seems from the conversation there that the most discussion really is invoked around the more people-centric factors rather than the technology factors. So that's really exciting to see. But that also means that we need to bring our citizens and non-experts into the discussion, which is a really important element of the equation. I'd like to lead into the last couple of questions before we go into the Q&A, which is firing up lots of questions for our speakers. So that's really positive. I might start back with you, Jasmina, again, talking a bit in the Australian context. We've known that Australia is pushing for cybersecurity as a national priority, and it's even got some investment in that in the latest budget to the tune of about 100 million. But and apparently they've committed to date around 1.67 billion towards the government's cybersecurity strategy, which was released in 2020. So just from your perspective, do you have a view as to whether Australia is in a good position to address the cybersecurity challenges of the future? So as a country, and has the government's strategy improved our resiliency? And could we even create a burgeoning export market for cybersecurity services?
Yeah, that's a really good question. There's a lot to unpack there. I guess, yeah, so like reading through, I mean, I read through this strategy last year, so my memory may be a bit fuzzy, but reading through that, I think one of the biggest takeaways that I had was that there was a lot of conversation around what we should be doing, but not how we're going to get there from the government. And I don't think that it's a problem that surely the government needs to solve, but I do think there needs to be some guidance for people who are seeking that guidance around what they should be doing. So I did see some good things about better intelligence sharing. I think intelligence sharing is one of those scary things where people say, oh, we don't want to tell other companies about us being hacked, how we've been hacked, what we've seen in our own networks, because it's embarrassing. We don't want to make ourselves look weak and all that kind of stuff. But I do think organizations, and there's some industries that, like the banking industry, for example, in Australia has a really good kind of intelligence sharing network. But I think organizations need to get a lot better at sharing intelligence. And so in the strategy, the government has actually said that they're going to work towards facilitating that intelligence sharing. So I really liked that. But I do think it was a bit vague in terms of actionable steps that are going to be taken. So it said, we're going to think about doing all these things, but we're not really going to tell you how we're going to do it and how we're going to get there. So from my perspective, I think Australia's in a good position in terms of what I'm seeing, like the young talent coming through. But in terms of organizations that I've worked with so far, some are very immature, and I think we have a long way to go. Especially with some of the recommendations that the government is making is stuff that people should have been doing 10, 15 years ago. Like the ASD Essential 8 is way out of date. That's a wrap, by the way. But yeah, essentially, I don't know. I think we're in a good position. We're on a good trajectory. I just think we need to go a little bit faster, to be honest.
That's really good advice, because if it's a national priority, and I know for a fact as a person who works in a research institution that cybersecurity is also a research priority. So it's actually both a government priority, it's a research priority. It's got to be an industry and private sector priority in Australia. So that's something I think we're going to have to maybe do whatever we can in all sectors to try and advocate for in the Australian context.
Yeah. One thing I just wanted to, oh, sorry, that was a bit of a lag.
Go ahead.
One thing I just wanted to touch on top of that was there is, it's an industry priority. Like you said, it's a research priority, but it's also a matter of national security as well. And I think that that's something people need to really think about, that a lot of the wars are happening in cyberspace now. So last year, some of us might remember that Scott Morrison came out and gave a speech around a certain attack campaign that was hitting some organizations, and I think some government arms as well. And then the ACSC, the Australian Cybersecurity Centre, released a report basically detailing some of the tactics and techniques so that organizations could protect themselves. And what I found especially concerning about that report was that none of those tactics and techniques were new. These were all things that in the private sector we had seen, we were advising organizations to do things about for years. And, you know, we see this report and it's like kindergarten stuff. So the fact that some of those attacks were semi-successful, maybe stopped halfway through or kind of made it through the gate a little bit, was, you know, really, really concerning. So that's kind of what I'm thinking as well, is like, all right, we've got our industry, you know, we've got our research, but we've also got our national security to think about as well.
That's a very good piece of advice. And I you know, there's a lot of pillars and a lot to unpack there, but I think we got to keep advocating for it. This is not, as you say, our level of maturity needs to address some of these issues as a country. Now, moving from one country to another, I'm going to just fire the last question at Avi. You know, Israel's cybersecurity industry is a burgeoning one. So this is from a private sector point of view. No doubt you could also fill us in on the national priorities as well. But I'll focus my question on the industry. It accounted for 31% of global investments in the sector in the last year, which was the COVID year. And Israel's cybersecurity startups have posted 70% growth in funding in 2020 during the pandemic. Can you comment on the success of this and also your own experience at SixSkill?
Yeah, yes. I think, as you mentioned, that the government has done a very good job in that term, in terms of creating the ecosystem and in terms of investing into that. For example, I think that the first country in the OECD with the bigger budget for R&D. And I think I've read a few days ago that 33% of the whole world unicorns in the field come from Israel. So it's really, I've done a very good job, and I think it switched a lot with the personality of what we are living here. We all read the news, and some of us also experience the news. So it's a continuous challenge. And I think you need to improvise all the time. By the way, speaking about sophistication, it's a total challenge from both sides. Okay, one side want to be more sophisticated in order to cause the most damage as it can. At the other side, want to be on the edge in order to anticipate to that possible damage and attack. So it's kind of everything suite for everything. And the ecosystem also reflects itself, for example, here in the Army, which has been a great incubator, and we are all the time in touch, all the different parts of the country and intelligence, we all cooperate all the time. So, but the collective intelligence is increasing, and we all learn from experience from one another. And I think all these factors contribute, and together with having that from the government point of view as a national priority or in the investment. Yeah, I think that they have done a good job.
That's great. Thanks, Avi. It's good to get those two perspectives. And I think there is some opportunities potentially for some learnings from both sides. Both different contexts in terms of countries. Both have cybersecurity as a priority, but I think there's certainly room for sharing best practice and so forth, and hopefully across both or three things: private sector, public sector, and also the national security question. Look, we're really traveling well in terms of time, but I would like to move towards our questions from the audience. There are quite a lot, and I would like to really try and give as much airtime as possible to our guests who are listening. I think I'm going to combine a few questions together. There is a real appetite out there from the listeners around the dark web, which we haven't really touched on much so far in the presentation. And I wondered whether we could tackle a couple of those questions. So there are questions pretty much as foundational as, you know, how did the dark web get created and how does it operate, to what are the main issues in the dark web today. But also there was a question in relation to, you know, whether the dark web is all about, you know, malicious things, or whether there is another side when you delve deeper into it. So I'm summarizing a little bit of the feels from the audience so that we can tackle the dark web question. Who'd like to kick off on having a go at some of those?
I'll let Avi go first on this one.
I can. Thank you. Well, regarding how it started, I think it started like first of all, let's put things for say everyone know what the dark web is. Yes, we have basically in this world, the world we live, three different concepts. Okay, we have the clear web, which is the regular web we all know. We have the deep web, which is everything that is not indexed by regular search engines, like Google, for example. And then we have the dark web, that is a subgroup of the deep web, that basically say, besides not being indexed by regular search engines, everything there is anonymous and encrypted. Okay, and I think it's regarding the starting at the origin, it started as a project of the US Navy, as far as I know, that if there is a total atomic bomb and no communication, so there will be a place for people to communicate to each other. But you know that there is a saying that this the path to hell is followed by very good intentions. And with the time, it attracted people where the intentions were not so good. So regarding the second part of the question, whether everything is bad there, no, the answer is no, not everything is bad there, okay? For example, there are places where people don't have freedom of speech. So you may argue if you want to speak freely, this is a good place. And another thing is, how do you know about stuff that are going on in countries or places when you don't have freedom of press and the communication of all the communications is very censored, etc. So that's a great tool. Yeah, and there are other examples as well. Yes, collective intelligence, etc., etc. However, it is true that it attracts a lot of people with no so clear intentions. So, what you can find there, I don't know if it's possible to answer that question, but you can find everything that you can imagine and you cannot imagine, from the worst things the humankind has ever created. Okay, from the child pornography to traffic, human trafficking, organ traffic, whatever you may imagine, on what you can. So that are the two sides of the things. I hope it answers a little bit the question.
That's great. Jasmine, do you want to add anything to that from your perspective?
Absolutely not. You hit the nail on the head. I can't answer anymore. It was perfect.
Just one last thing before we leave the dark web. You talked about, Avi, everything from the worst of humanity all the way to the, well, probably not the best, but certainly the worst. Someone's asking whether it might be, would it be advisable possibly for people who are trying to protect through cybersecurity, assets or companies or government, would it be advisable to spend time on the dark web in order to, be updated with the latest exploits so that you can actually counter those, the ones that are being developed? Is that something to be looked at?
I think it's a very general question. I mean, it's like, imagine it's like you ask, okay, it's worth to go to a city where you have never been before, it's totally in dark. If you know where the places that interest you are in those cities and where to go and how to enter those places, that's another story. But many people don't know. Okay, so there are no regular search engines, as we mentioned before. So it will be a challenge to know where to go. And even if you know where to go, it will another challenge convince people to let you in there. So in general, they don't want you to be there. And even if you pass and you know all these things, yes and no, go at your own responsibility too. I mean, we're all grown-up persons.
The only thing I would add to that is that, look, it's not just advisable, it's absolutely necessary for security defenders to know what attackers are doing. I think where you get that information from varies, because there are professionals that intelligence collectors that do this for a living, and there are lots of things to take into consideration about how you do collection, your operational security, as Avi mentioned. Where do you go? How do you get let in? And how do you protect yourself as well? you might just be looking, but you know, you could cross paths with the wrong person. These are not always people that operate by the same moral and legal kind of standards that you have. So collections is actually a little bit dangerous as well. In the security field though, absolutely, you do have to know what the latest exploits out there are, because how are you going to protect yourself if you're not on the front foot? So a lot of what happens is sometimes it goes that you've got your intelligence people who collect data, analyze, you know, and then spit something out, and they will pass that, make sense of it onto, you know, your blue team people who will then consume it and do something with it. But you know, this is kind of a very new area, and in my personal opinion, a lot of people do it wrong and try to pass off data as intelligence when it isn't. I'm sure Abby probably has a lot of gripes about this when people try to, you know, say they're doing intelligence and they're not. So it's very, at least in Australia, it's not a very mature industry. And you know, it has its pros and cons, and you know, it's kind of an enter at your own risk type of a situation.
I will add also to the great explanation of Jasmina that if you want to know what's going on the dark web, for example, you can buy 6 kill. That's another way.
Nice one.
That will tell you exactly what you want.
What a good promo there. Very
Not
nice.
that I'm trying to promote anything.
No, not at all. It was great. Look, I think you've both touched upon pretty much a lot of the questions. As I said, lots of questions on the dark web, which I think you've all answered, all the dimensions that have been put up on the questions so far. I'd like to change gear a little bit because, you know, one of the first questions that came up, which I think is very general, and that as such it's an open question in a sense, and please feel free to chime in. It's very important. The question is, how do you protect the average private amateur citizen? You know, how does one protect oneself?
From my perspective, it's education, really well and truly. Like technology, yes, you can put all these technological barriers in place. People in my industry, we don't use things like antivirus because we just don't click on dumb shit. Like, to be honest with you, like it's really about, I mean, some of us might, it's obviously reducing it a lot, but it's really about knowing, you know, what's out there, knowing what kinds of threats there are, and protecting yourself against them. And technology will always fail you, so you need to be educated about, you know, what's out there, and that's the nature of intelligence too. But for your average kind of layman, so to speak, even simple things like, you know, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, people didn't really know how to spot a phishing email maybe. And now maybe they do, you know, even my parents come to me and they go, is this scammy? I don't know, it looks a bit weird. So the fact that people are cottoning on to these tactics is actually really good. And I think honestly, that is the first and best kind of defense that you can possibly, you know, give to people. Yeah.
To add of what Jasmina said, 3 words: education, education, and education. That's that's my humble contribution. I sometimes, you know, sometimes it sounds like okay, I need to educate myself in cyber, but sometimes I see people, for example, posting their life on Facebook, and you catch your head. I mean, the amount, the identity there for other stuff that you can do based on that is huge. People are not aware of the very, very simple things. Not to speak if you have kids, for example, you're a father or a mother. So yeah, education of the very basic stuff, first of all, without going further.
Well, that's really important, and you know, that's a bit of a plug that I can put. You know, that education at UTS and at Technion, I'm sure helps. But of course, I think education goes even further down than university degrees, because obviously universities are trying to propel the graduates of the next generation, and we've got 2 fine alumni here tonight. But there's also the education at the level of, you know, the individual, the youth. You know, my daughter has got, you know, already using technology now, and she asks me whenever someone sends her something so that I can help her. But what happens if there's no one else that can assist with that? The education's got to be there at the youngest level, in a sense. We need to really be training as citizens, as private citizens from the beginning. So I'm really glad you mentioned the education piece. So thanks for that. Look, I'm going to change the gear again, and there's been a question around, government systems versus private systems. Now, I think I know the answer to this, but I think you might provide a bit of a feel to it from your cyber expertise perspective. This questioner says, there are more government systems now that are online. It's growing, and accessible services are there for private citizens and customers, which are the population. So the question is, is the government sector better prepared against cybercrime, or is it the private sector?
Potentially spicy opinion. I think the government sector is woefully underprepared to deal with some of the cyber threats that are out there. Just from my personal anecdotal, like what I've seen, the fact of the matter is, I think the private sector, there's a lot more expertise and industry experience that's floating around, and a lot more funding. There's more capital, research, all that kind of stuff. Of course, there are brilliant people that work for the government sector, but unfortunately, I just think that from what I've seen, the industry sector is that it's always just that step ahead because of the competitive nature of it. You kind of have to be, right? And, I'm not advocating for capitalism, but basically, that's kind of how it works. The competition breeds the innovation there. I do think that something needs to be done, though, because as the question asker mentioned, a lot of our data is now lying in those government systems. I live in South Australia, so I use the COVID Safe check-in app everywhere. It's mandated, and I'm sure we all kind of cringe when we think about the woeful COVID Safe app rollout that happened last year. So, our data is now in the hands of our governments, and we need to care about that. So I definitely think that some strides need to be made there in terms of expertise, knowledge, and capability.
That's great. Yeah, look, I think you've hit the spot on about the competitiveness element as well. Avi, did you have any perspective from your side? I mean, here in Australia, we've got a particular perspective around private versus public. What about yourselves in Israel?
We have experience with several governments and private sector as well. And from my experience, for our experience, I mean, that there are great people and great industries in both places. Even people keep switching from the private to the government and vice versa. I think it's a matter also of they've seen that the risk is impact multiplied by the probability of that happening, and since the motivation is very, very high, so the probability grows. And we all know, for example, in state-related issue, the impact can be huge. So when there is this possible huge impact with the probability of this occurring increasing, that there is much more resources and attractive private sector. By the way, I think that here in Israel, the government also did a lot with that. When I say that they did a good job, they brought a lot of the private sector into the governmental sector. And my experience is that they are both, I mean, the bulk are very well developed in all over the world, both private and sector.
So look, I think it's interesting that public-private sector discussion. I think at the end of the day, what we'll hope, because we all have engagement with both as private citizens, but also in various industry sectors outside of cybersecurity sector. We hope that both will provide the security we need. But speaking of which, I've got a very simple, short question, which I think I'll focus on now. Is where did most of our attacks come from? Nation states? ? What can you comment on, Jasmina and Avi, from your experiences?
I'll let Avi go first. I keep going first. I feel bad.
That's okay. That's okay. Where did it come from? I mean, coming back to what we said before, I mean, the motivation is huge. The incentives for that to happen are huge. The money involved is huge. The reputational is huge, both the reputational damage that can be done both to a person and to a state, we all know, and the reputation both of people inside maybe the dark web, okay? And this is very interesting because nobody knows these guys outside the dark web, but it sounds that this is enough. Or the countries. So where do they come from is hard to say because there is not a black and white answer. But we managed to see, I mean, to interpret that they come many nations, kilo nation state, or even sometimes they are individuals. Today they are individuals trying to hurt the state. So attacking the public infrastructure, the water, the electricity, whatever. So the line is very blurred and it becomes all one, I think.
Yeah. From my perspective, I think like just on my observations, it is very varied. And I think that like when you say where do most of our cyber attacks come from, we have to think about like who the target is for us to find out who the source is. So if you're talking about, you know, an average person, you know, falling victim to a cyber attack and losing money, it's most likely going to be coming from a, you know, petty criminal that is, you know, perpetrating that because that's their motivation. So you've got to actually think about who the target is and what the motivation is to find out more about who the perpetrator is, if that makes sense. Sometimes you see interesting things where the adversary will try to misattribute themselves either as a nation state or not as a nation state. So some petty cyber criminals may masquerade and pretend that they're a nation state or pretend to be another hacker group just to get, you know, just to feel that like feeling of power. So again, this psychological kind of aspect kind of rolls all into it. Some nation states have even, you know, it's been assessed that they may be trying to pretend to be other nation states to try and get those nation states in trouble. It's just all over the place. But primarily the motivation is, you know, for the cybercrime, it's usually money and power. And for the nation states, information gathering and espionage, you know, in my experience.
That's really great because, you know, a lot of maybe people who are listening tonight, you know, they really don't have a sense of where things are coming from. You know, we hear a lot about it, but it's only when you work in the industry like yourselves that you can actually, you know, really understand not only where it's coming from, but motivations. So it's really some useful insights from both of you. Another country question here, but it's more around, I suppose this question talks about which country is dominating cybersecurity research and the dark web. I mean, it talks about cybersecurity research, this question, but I think we could broaden that out to, you know, which is the best country in that area. You know, you know, it'll be hard for you both to choose, but any thoughts, any, you know, places of best practice, any insights you have from your experiences?
This is not my area of expertise. I'm going to pass on this one.
Avi, what are your thoughts?
It's a very tricky question. I will say that the countries that have the most motivation for doing that are the ones who are more developed, and all of us know a little bit to have an idea of the trying to be the new world order, so you can reach your conclusions along from that.
Okay, good short and sweet answer. I think it was a challenging one, but it's enough to get you thinking, I suppose. I'll bring it back to more the individual, or should I say, there is some people who are trying to ask a question around, you know, specific situations, and I suppose they're interested because you probably see them. Are you, if you are able to, can you give an example of both a successful and an unsuccessful cyber attack that you've seen or experienced?
Yeah, that's a hard one because I'm trying to think like of an interesting one, because I'm not going to lie to you, there's a lot of cyber attacks that are just not that interesting. You see a lot of like commodity malware And you're like, well, that wasn't fun. Like, you could have at least tried something cool. Let me think. So I've seen an interesting situation, and this happens actually quite often, but it's one that I dealt with personally, where it's not a Campbell by Light, another company. An organization was tipped off to the fact that somebody on the dark web, on a cybercrime forum, had claimed to have that their access to their network for sale in some kind of bundle. So you could purchase the bundle, and then in that bundle, you get access, you know, either through, you know, BNC, IDP, or SSH, some kind of remote access to their network, and a bunch of other companies too. So it was actually sold as a package deal. And the way that the ecosystem works is quite interesting, because the person who was selling it was like putting their hands up and saying, I haven't touched it. It's fresh, clean access. And I've not implanted any malware. All I've done is get access, and it's all for you. And the arguments that ensue afterwards about whether they had touched it or not, oh, you sold it to this guy, and then you sold it to me, and now we're both in there together, we could see each other, like the petty arguments happening. All the while, the company that I'm trying to assist solve the problem, it was a very successful cyber attack, because they were in there for a really long time and hadn't left a trace, due to the fact that they hadn't done anything with it. It was only until they had attempted to sell it that anything was known about the situation. So I would say that that was successful in the sense that it didn't tip off any alarm bells straight away. It was a slow, kind of steady attack. And eventually we were able to assist them in shutting down, you know, the vulnerable point where the attacker came in, using our intelligence, going into the forums and seeing, you know, how do they work? Oh, okay, they probably targeted this. So that was a really interesting one. Unsuccessful attacks happen every single day, every single day. There's like really, really, really dumb ones where you might see, you know, bot accounts just hitting a firewall, for example. Like that is your stock standard unsuccessful attack. Or people trying to brute force, you know, SSH logins to things, stuff like that. So the sophistication ranges, and I think the successful ones are more sophisticated, where a person is thinking about who is my target, what am I trying to get, and how am I going to get there. And the unsuccessful ones are usually, I don't know anything about computers, and I went on the dark web and I purchased this like malware tool and I pressed the go button, but I'm not really sure what to do after that, which happens quite a lot.
Thanks, Jasmina. That's really good. I'm sure the questioner will appreciate the detail on that one. It's obviously not, there's just too many to choose from probably. Avi, do you have any quick examples?
Yes, I can. Yeah, we have an example, and I think it also exemplifies the difference between the cybersecurity, cyber intelligence, for example. We had a customer, I mean, I can say that because it was public information, but we had a customer in the financial sector, financial institution. Basically, what happened is their ATMs were being stolen. So money was missing or mishandled. We all read in the news from time to time, or don't read in the news because there is an interest not to read, not to publish these kind of things, okay? But this was a story, and it was very interesting because at the beginning, it was very challenging. Nobody had an idea really how this guy or these guys were doing what they were doing. So basically we started to research, of course, in the dark web and the clear web and wherever, how this can be done, how all the engineers and the security and even the government started to be there to investigate. And it looked at the beginning that it was like of mice, they were playing with us, a cat and mouse game. So it doesn't matter what you do. I mean, they will also be ahead of your next step. So basically, some guys were playing with us, and until we need to stop that, okay? And the way to stop is we start to think a little different. What do I mean? First of all, if someone can do this kind of thing, because not everyone knows how to steal an ATM, right? Probably in my local coffee, I guess not many people know there, but there are guys who live from that. So if some people know who can be? So we started thinking, because we know some threat actors, it's called threat actors in the dark web. And we started thinking there is no way this can be happening. This threat actor and this threat actor have no idea what's going on. So let's start thinking and let's start seeing what's going on in their lives, okay? And then when we start, when you change this paradigm and you start investigating, you realize that they have something to do in that regard. And the more you penetrate that, and the more you penetrate this dark web social network, the more you find about that. At the end, we all are human beings, and we all fail, but human nature, our emotions, and this can be tricked and manipulated. But this is, but by the way, this was a world international cybercrime. It was dispersed among several countries in the world. Just imagine the amount of complexity that this should have. If someone knows, for example, if you know how to write a code, who can trick, okay? Maybe you need to hire someone. He will not do that because you have nice eyes, okay? But because he wants money, probably. So how do you move the money to them? Someone else need to extract the money or to put it in the car. And even if you manage to steal, where do you send your money? To your bank account? Probably not the best option. So your friend's account, depends which friends, but it's just imagine the amount of complexity there. By the way, the solution that they're third party, but this third party who assure they are not the best guys in the world. So this third party can take your money and run away, right? So there are many complexities, and it was really interesting. It was a nice young guy that, by the way, to your first question, made you raise your question, why some people do what they do, because the amount of intellectual development that these people have is huge. Okay, they can do whatever they want every place in the world. So what they are doing. So it's a kind of challenge, it's human nature, but it was very interesting. Regarding the not successful, as Jasmina said, infinite.
Look, thanks so much for you both. Now, look, I'm being given the wrap up, but I just want to ask you one last question. I know I'm going to be slapped on the wrist by Ori for this, but last question, where do you think the trend in cyber attacks or even cyber terrorism is going in the near future? If you could answer in one sentence, each of you, that'd be amazing.
I'll try not to be long-winded. Operational technology, gas pipelines, electricity, stuff like that. That's my very quick answer. Scary. Avi?
Whatever the most damage and impact will be, which is infrastructure, okay? And now we have autonomous cars, maybe in the near future, etc.
Well, let's hope that both of you in your respective roles and all cyber experts around the world help us to protect, particularly for private citizens, against these threats. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with both of you. Thank you so much, Jasmina and Avi, for your time tonight. It's been an exciting, discussion, and I really have to apologize to all the people. There's so many questions, we couldn't answer them all, but thank you all, the audience, for your questions, and really appreciate your time. And I'll now hand back to Ori. Thanks so much.
Thanks to you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, everyone. Like you said, there's still a lot of questions, and I know we could have gone for at least another hour easily, but I wanted to firstly thank all our attendees who turned up today, and also especially thank our speakers. Avi, we hope that we can welcome you to Australia sometime soon once this pandemic is a bit more stable. And Jasmina, of course, and Michael, we hope to host you in Israel at some point. Lastly, I just wanted to thank UTS and the Embassy of Israel for their partnership again. And just for our audience to prepare you, we'll send you some information about our next event. We want to take you on a journey out of space. So some of you may know, but there's a second astronaut that's planned to visit space, second Israeli astronaut, I should say, sometime next year. And he'll be taking about half a dozen experiments from the Technion to outer space. So although he's not the speaker, we're going to get people who are involved to share the stories. It's going to be really exciting, and we'll send you some more information shortly. Lastly, when you sign off, you're going to receive a really quick survey, probably less than a minute to complete, and really help us improve what we do. So on that note, I wanted to thank you all, and until next time, take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. See you.